Well, more on the president's trip to Selma, Alabama, as the nation marked the 58th year since a Bloody Sunday when officers attacked civil rights activists trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Mr. Biden marched with civil rights leaders on that landmark bridge yesterday and called for stronger voting protections.
The right to vote, to have your vote counted, is the threshold of democracy and liberty. With it, anything's possible. Without it, without that right, nothing is possible. And this fundamental right remains under assault.
The president also talked about a pending case before the Supreme Court from Alabama that could weaken the Voting Rights Act. A decision is expected in that case at the end of the term. So for more on this, let's bring in senior White House political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who is standing by. So Ed, I think this is kind of interesting. Most of the time that we've seen the president leave recently, Washington, it's usually been to talk about the economy, to talk about some bill or something that he's doing, that he's trying to kind of drum up support. Talk to us about how this was a little bit different and why this was significant.
Well, it's significant because it's a place that especially Democratic presidents go to reinforce their support for the civil rights and perhaps the more modern voting rights movement. And that's what he did on Sunday, but also used the appearance to sort of tick through his accomplishments, or at least those that would probably resonate well with black Americans, especially reminding them that he's pushed for voting rights, he's pushing for gun control measures. The legislation that was passed in the last 2 years is of economic benefit to African Americans and other minorities across the country. It was a workmanlike speech, not nearly as prosaic as those given perhaps by former President Obama when he was there, but the kind of stop one should make if they're seeking re-election and need black voter support ahead of that. This was a good symbolic reminder of the fact that he knows, and he talks about it every week, that he is in the White House because of the support of black voters. So an important stop for him to make. And he mentioned, Alabama has some of the tougher or the more frustrating voting rights laws in that they have a congressional map, for example, that doesn't necessarily carve out a second district for a majority black population as Democrats and civil rights activists would have preferred. And it is, as you said, subject to a Supreme Court challenge. And then just sort of reiterated that, despite the Supreme Court, they're going to continue pushing for changes in voting rights laws and to maintain civil rights, as of course the activists who crossed that bridge 58 years ago on Bloody Sunday certainly did.
So the president's back in Washington. What's on the agenda?
Big, another appearance today, Anne-Marie, designed to shore up the base ahead of the anticipated re-election announcement. He will speak to a group called the International Association of Firefighters. You can imagine what they are and what they do. It is a big union for them. This is a group of people that have been with Biden since he was in the Senate, seen as a reliable piece of his sort of base of support, those that back him. He likes to call himself the most union and labor-friendly president in modern times. That's probably accurate. And so he goes to them today again to talk about the state of things and the state of his political career. He made a similar stop back in 2019 ahead of his announcement. It was a closely watched speech then because it was one of his most high profile at the time before he started his campaign. So when I saw this pop up in the schedule last week, I said, aha, here we go. This is the early preview. This is where maybe they can road test a few thoughts in front of a very friendly crowd. But these guys also are, in essence, foot soldiers for him on the ground in swing states, in early primary states. Not that he's necessarily going to need their support there, but he will need it come November 2024. And this labor union and others, of course, are always very good about turning out their members to help turn out the families and their neighbors and others and make sure that they're voting ahead of big elections. So watch this speech today for tea leaves and for signals that he's getting ready for re-election.
Oh, that's so interesting. Listen, I want to ask you about something else that, we brought up, I think, last week. And I didn't understand why this was such a hot topic for so many politicians. President Biden decided not to veto a bill that would block Washington, D.C.'s new criminal code. Now, Washington, D.C., and you can explain better than me, is in a unique position when it comes to it can't make independent decisions like other cities. So can you talk about what this shift is? It has to do with removing minimum sentencing for crimes and other things. But why are Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, why are we hearing the president of the United States weighing in on this?
Yeah, remember, D.C. is not a state. It is subject to congressional review of its budget and any legislation that gets passed by its city council. If Congress doesn't like it, it can introduce legislation to reverse it. This is why residents of the district and neighboring Maryland and Virginia have pushed for some kind of statehood status or to have it absorbed by either of the states. There's all sorts of different proposals. Statehood is what a majority of people here in the district would prefer. Democrats traditionally say it should be a state. We are going to stay out of it. They should have what they call home rule. Except last week when he went to see Senate Democrats and said, by the way, if you guys pass that law that the House passed that says you want to reverse those decisions made by the city council on sentencing for things like carjackings and some other minor and major offenses, I won't veto that. Go ahead and sign it. Go ahead and pass it and I'll sign it. They're expected to do that this week in the Senate. Why did he do that? Despite being a decades-long supporter of statehood, it's about criminal justice reform. It's about crime. It's about the accusation that Democrats would rather defund the police than enact stricter sentences and do more to fund police. It's a sensitive issue for a president who, across his Senate career especially, was a strong defender of law enforcement and tough on crime measures, but also, of course, a supporter of the assault weapons ban and other gun control, arguing that it's just as threatening to cops as it is to everyday Americans. In this case, he knows there are about 4 or 5 moderate Democrats running for re-election in 2024 in red or purple states where if they vote against this thing, the attack ad will launch the next day saying they're soft on crime. Remember, he was opposed to the liberal push to defund the police or to make more radical changes, more ambitious changes in policing across the country, saying no. We have to make sure Americans are safe. We've seen this, of course, be an issue in the Chicago mayor's race last week, in New York's mayor's race last year or 2 years ago. So, you know, it's something he is sensitive to, and this was a chance to make a statement on that, believing ultimately that even here in D.C., a tough on crime stance is more important than a statehood stance when violent crime has been up as much as it has. There have been, I mean, like in New York, in Philly, and other cities across the country, there have been some real dramatic escalations and incidences of violence here in D.C., and he wants to do something about it.
Thanks for explaining that, Ed. I have clarity. Thank you very much.
Take care.